Well, hi there. I'm Colin. I hope you're doing fantastic wherever you happen to be. I'm on vacation, is where I happen to be. So I'm indeed doing fantastic myself. So cheers to you and cheers to me. Because I'm on vacation, I had the time to do something I've always been meaning to do in a video, which is compose a short poem to really get the spirit and the mood of the video going. So here it is. My wife and child are not with me. No one's keeping track of when I crap or pee. It's true I miss them and I shed a few tears, but I've replaced that moisture with 100 cold beers. There it is. I bet you didn't know I had that in my repertoire. Poetry. Very beautiful. Anyways, in this video, we're going to be discussing my top 5 90s producers, and I think the best guys of the 90s. Now, this video is going to focus on guys who came to prominence in the 90s. And if you're anything like close to my generation, I'm 41 years old. You put together a playlist like I did for driving up here to go surfing, and you kind of slowly realize that the same handful of guys had their fingerprints over most of everything you were listening to in the 90s, whether they started off as engineers on some of your favorite records and went on to produce some of your favorite bands, or whether they started right out in the production. So let's get right into it. If you have any disagreements with my choices, please let me know in the comments. If you have any valid, interesting information to add, or if you found that I got something wrong somehow, please let me know in the comments. But we'll start it off with number 5, and my choice for the 5th best producer of the 90s is Andrew Weiss. If you don't know who Andrew Weiss is, it's probably because you're not a Ween fan. And I have to say that his selection on this list is biased, as I'm a massive Ween fan. But if you don't know who he is, he played bass for the Rollins band. Played bass for Ween, of course, and for the Butthole Surfers. And he produced 2 albums closer to where we are here, 2015 and 2020, I think it was, for Modest Mouths. But his true legacy is his work as the producer of the, quote, ray of light emanating out of total darkness that is known as Ween. That's a quote from Rollins himself. But from God, Ween, Satan to Quebec, he produced all those albums, and he's even played bass with the band earlier on and on some of the records as well. If you're not a Ween fan, again, this might not be relevant to you, but I think that Ween is truly one of the greatest creative forces in music. I put their songwriting up there with anybody, including the Beatles or some of the other artists that I'm going to talk about on this list. And the job of capturing such a raw and wild creative force and focusing it into something as brilliant as what Ween's later discography would become is truly a talent. And he was there with them from God, Ween, Satan, and the Pod all the way up to Quebec. That body of work alone, the Ween discography, earns him a place on this list because they really are like nothing else. But I'm not going to keep talking about Ween till I'm blue or red in the face here. I'm going to move on to number 4 now. Number 4 on this list is Eric Valentine. And this is a guy I wasn't quite familiar with his credits. Obviously, I listened to a lot of the music, but I've heard his interview with Rick Beato, which is fantastic. You should go check out Rick's channel. He interviews a couple of these guys. But Eric Valentine gave us Smash Mouth's Foosh You Mang and Third Eye Blind's self-titled album, both, I think, within a couple of months of each other in 1997. And listen, I know that you know that we both know that I know that you like and listen to the songs on those records. You may not admit it, but Walking on the Sun, I mean, Smash Mouth was a weird ska band, and they happened to come into the studio and say they had a song that didn't really fit the repertoire, and that was Walking on the Sun. That's a great rock song, and one of the signatures of that is the keys, that great 60s, surfy sounding kind of keyboard playing, and that was Eric Valentine playing that on the record. In terms of the Third Eye Blind album, in terms of a 90s piece of music, and it's something that comes on the radio and you just think of the 90s, I can't think of a better well, maybe I can, and we'll get into that later, but Third Eye Blind was the 90s. Those songs were massive. Those records were massive. And actually, the singer from Third Eye Blind also did a very good interview on Rick Beato's channel, which you should go check out. But as a producer for a brief time in the late 90s, he absolutely dominated the airwaves And he went on to record and produce Songs for the Dead by Queens of the Stone Age and a ton of other records. So check out his discography if you're curious as to what else he's done. But he's a fantastic producer. And again, he's another guy who, like a lot of the guys on this list, he was brought the work of Third Eye Blind, the songs, and he didn't quite like or agree with the aesthetics or the sound, but he made it into something great and that sounded great. And in terms of a producer, capturing the essence of the band that comes to you, I think, is the most important job. And we're going to get into a little bit more of that later in the video. But anyways, number 3 on my list is Nigel Godrich. Pavement, REM, U2, Beck, and most of Radiohead's discography. Those names speak for themselves, but I think his work with Radiohead alone, kind of like Andrew Weiss's work with Ween, deserves him a spot on this list. Those records, those Radiohead records, right from the get-go, they were pristine. The ideas on those records were massive, and he was the guy in charge of putting it to tape at the time. Oftentimes when I think about Radiohead, I think about being out at a nice restaurant, a nice Italian restaurant with my wife, and it comes time to order the drinks, and I open up the drink menu, I look at the list of red wines, and I just find one that's not too expensive and not too cheap, usually a Shiraz or Pinot Noir, and I just go, I'll have that one, please. And then it comes, and I have a glass, and it's just perfect. And then my meal comes, I get another glass, and it just goes perfectly with my meal. And to be honest with you, I've done nothing. I made that choice based on it probably being in the middle of the wine list or having a funny name of some kind, but it was perfect, and I had no hand in it. And when Radiohead's music comes to my ears, it's perfect, and I have nothing to do with it, and I don't understand why it's so perfect or how it came to be, but in that moment, it is pristine and perfect. And, you know, am I smarter for liking Radiohead's music, or do I just pick it by chance? And they're just brilliant and deliver. I don't know. You should go check out his discography as well. It's absolutely insane. Number 2 on this list is a guy who could not be left off this list. It's Butch Vig. Butch Vig captured the Smashing Pumpkins, Sonic Youth, and Nirvana perfectly as a sonic snapshot of that time. Now, Nirvana changed the landscape of music for the 90s. They were the biggest thing since the Beatles in the 60s, and everything went from hair metal and over-the-top cheeseball solos and guys wearing women's clothes to dirty plaid, unkempt, bleach blonde hair overnight. They completely changed everything. When Bleach came out, I was maybe 8 years old or 7 years old, or possibly bad at math then and horrible at math now still. But when that came out, my older brother, 3 years older than me, he went from this guy who, you know, inexplicably shaved one eyebrow, wore pump shoes, and tried to do breakdancing, and he was listening to what was the band at the time? Not the Backstreet Boys. What was before? The New Kids on the Block. He went from being that to being a guitar slinging poet, like overnight. It changed his life, and I got to see that change. I was a little bit young to kind of be caught up in culture, you know. I was still eating dirt periodically at the time. But that changed the world, and I was there to see it. And Butch getting those guys to tape, and if you've watched any interviews with him, he definitely had a hand in evolving their sound and capturing what they were live, which is something that's kind of hard to do sometimes. Even the best band in the world can be hard to really capture on tape, but he did it. And there's a particularly poignant part in an interview I saw with him where he convinces Kurt Cobain to double track his vocals to give him that huge sound, and Kurt said he doesn't want to do it, and then Butch Vig tells him that John Lennon double tracked his vocals and he agreed to do it. But, you know, that interesting link between the Beatles and Nirvana is fascinating, and Butch's other notable works include Garbage, Killdozer, Helmet, and Soul Asylum, another huge 90s band. But yeah, there's a lot of people who've talked, you know, to no end about Nirvana and the Smashing Pumpkins, and including Billy Corgan himself. My God, that man will tell you everything about the Smashing Pumpkins. But anyways, I've got a little bit of fatigue with some of those bands. To be honest with you, let me know what your thoughts are in the comments. Or can you still listen to some of those real heavy period bands? like Nirvana, because Nirvana to me it sounds like, I'm not going to say it sounds dated, but it does it sounds like it's from a place that I don't exist in anymore. I don't know. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. So, my choice for the number one 90s producer is a guy by the name of Brendon O'Brien. Some producers have a great technical sensibility. They start off as engineers, as Brendon O'Brien did. Other guys have a great sense of taste and can guide artists to their best creative decisions. I think Brendon has both. He stood out and started out as an engineer working for bands like the Black Crowes, Red Hot Chili Peppers, and Aerosmith under the tutelage of Rick Rubin. Among others, in Temple the Dog, he was everywhere with all the biggest names in the 90s, and then he went on eventually to work for bands like Stone Temple Pilots and shape their sounds. His discography is insane, and if you don't believe me, just stop this video and go check it out. But his work with the Stone Temple Pilots, I think, presents the peak of what a 90s band could become. I think the Stone Temple Pilots, they start out with their early tracks that are kind of like that Pearl Jam-ish kind of singing with the soft, heavy stuff that Nirvana was doing, but by the end of it, they get to tracks like Lady Picture Show, which is I think just a brilliant piece of rock music evolved, taking elements of the 60s and bringing in that 90s aesthetic. I think Brendon O'Brien's work in terms of evolution is the best there is. And go check out his discography. But on the note of a producer having a technical sensibility or a creative sensibility, I do want to touch now on two names that were excluded from this list, and that would be Bob Rock and Rick Rubin. I didn't put them on this list because both of those guys are monsters, and their work extends back into the 80s. Bob Rock obviously he worked with absolutely everybody, from Loverboy, Motley Crue, The Cult, Colin James. The list just goes on and on, Bon Jovi, etc. And then in the 90s, he worked with, again, Metallica, Veruca Salt, even Our Lady Peace, the Tragically Hip, American Hi-Fi. Monsters, right? These guys aren't excluded to the 90s. These guys are like just absolutely 30 years on absolute tear. But I just want to talk about this next guy mainly because the creative versus technical sort of thing. So Rick Rubin worked with everybody from Slayer to Tom Petty, Johnny Cash, and The Strokes. And Rick Rubin himself has said that he's not a technical guy. What's that line he has? I can't play an instrument. I don't know which microphone is which microphone and all that. But he seems to have, for whatever reason, an uncanny ability to help guide artists in making creative choices that result in as near to perfection as they can possibly get. You look at Ed O'Brien, who was an engineer, a very technical guy. I've heard interviews with Eric Valentine, Butch Vig. Nigel Godrich obviously knows his way around a control room, but great command of creativity and sensibilities too. But Rick Rubin, I would have to say, would be my all-time favorite producer because of the body of work that he's had and because he's been right there on the pulse of great things as they're about to happen. And he's had a hand in bringing that to everybody, whether it's through hip-hop with bands like the Beastie Boys and some of his earlier work, or whether it's bands with in heavy metal like Slayer, for God's sakes. He produced Rain and Blood and Seasons of the Abyss, which is unbelievable. One of my favorite bands of all time he worked with, the Red Hot Chili Peppers, Blood, Sugar, Sex Magic, classic, and all of their potent records were made with him. He did the infamous Andrew Dice Clay comedy album where he supposedly went and purposely bombed. Worked with Tom Petty on some of his best music. Brought Johnny Cash, out of the doldrums of kind of Americana back into the relevant, public discussion with those later albums that he did. Helped Johnny find a new creative lease on life, and of course that kind of culminated with the Joaquin Phoenix movie. It researched Johnny's popularity, and so to me he's all-time greatest producer for me personally because of the wider cultural impact he has, and because for whatever reason he can get the best out of somebody regardless of what their discipline or genre is. Anyways, that about wraps this video up. Probably went on a little too long, but I do find it interesting to talk about producers. Let me know in your comments what you think about my list, if you have anything to add, or if you have some contradictory points or somebody that I didn't think of. Anyways, I'm going to finish this beer. This vacation's winding down, but it's been a good one. If you can get away and make some time for yourself, I encourage you to do so. Anyways, cheers. You take care. I'll see you in another video. Bye-bye.